welcome.
Hi.
So my name is Jeff Allen. This is the Follow Your Feet podcast. It's exploring what it's like to be an expat, to be a foreigner living in a foreign country, and all the adventures, challenges, and benefits that come from being a stranger in a strange land, so to speak. So my guest today is Sam, and we're currently located in Prague, Czech Republic, so the center of Europe pretty much. But of course, there's many neighboring countries to Czech Republic. And so my guest today, Sam, is one of them. So first, welcome, Sam.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being
occasion.
a guest.
Yeah.
So first, tell us a little bit about your background. Which country are you from? Where did you grow up? And what can you tell us a little bit about your native land?
So, straight off the bat, Slovakia. So, neighboring country to Czech Republic. Very, very close. In many ways, incredibly similar to the Czech Republic. So, you really went for the lowest level of an expat here. All right.
Well, what can you tell us about Slovakia?
It's a country with a rich history. Used to be Czechoslovakia, so incredibly similar as far as culture, language, people goes to the Czech Republic.
And that divorce with Czechoslovakia was relatively recent history.
Yes, relatively recent. We're talking 1980s, 90s. That's when the process sort of began. Had a lot to do with the collapse of the Soviet Union, all of that fun stuff we experienced in the late 20th century. So very recent, very peaceful as well, all things considered, as far as like national divorces go.
Well, yes,
the world.
The revolution is called the Velvet Revolution, and shortly thereafter, in the early 90s, is the Velvet Divorce, the separation between Czech Republic and Slovakia.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, as a teacher, you might even know more than me about this. Not the most flashy of separations of countries.
But on a personal level, yeah. I mean, it does. We don't have to give a history lesson per se, but just what can you say about your country for probably your average? I'm Canadian, American who probably doesn't know a lot about Slovakia. What could you tell us about your country?
All right. So I'd mention a fun fact that kind of sort of connects to the entirety of the Slovak culture in a lot of ways. So we are the country with, I believe, the most still not functioning but standing castles in the whole world. And that kind of tells you a lot about our culture in the fact that we are very traditionalist, quite a conservative country when it comes to political leaning of the people. Definitely very influenced by our history. The people have been sort of conditioned to be a part of something like a larger empire, not having their own voice necessarily as a population. So we're still sort of getting used to it over the past tens of years. Past 30 years or so.
Do you feel your nation gets overlooked, perhaps, in international politics?
It gets confused a lot with Slovenia. That kind of tells a lot as well, where our largest export is cars. Not the most interesting or the most flashy of things. Definitely still trying to find its voice on the global spectrum. Not global spectrum, but the global community of countries, let's say. It's. I would say it's like a. How could I explain it?
Well, maybe let's move it more to, once again, from the political sort of global level to more personal level. Because obviously you're young enough. You were brought up in Slovakia post the Velvet Divorce, so post Czechoslovakia. So where exactly in Slovakia did you grow up, and generally, what can you tell us what your upbringing was like, and in your part of the country where you grew up?
Right. So I grew up near Bratislava, which is the capital city of Slovakia, which also is very close to both Austria and Hungary. Basically, what this means for us is that we are just constantly influenced by other countries. It appears in our language. It appears in our day-to-day life. So yeah, always had a lot of experience with people from other countries. As far as like the personal experience of what Slovakia is like, it is a very maybe not giving, but a very not friendly. I'm trying to look for the correct word here.
Well, I'm going to help you a little bit here because
Yeah.
I have been to Bratislava a couple of times, and I generally actually do have a good opinion of the Slovaks. I have found them generally to be friendly and helpful, at least for me as there as a tourist. However, there's still some of this, I don't know how to describe it, some of this leftover from a period of socialism where people tended to be perhaps a little bit grumpier, a little bit more distant, a little more pessimistic in their outlook.
Yes.
So I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, that's probably why you're struggling a little bit. Like the people are friendly, but
Exactly.
there's still some of these remnants of the socialist regime.
Yeah, on that-
How did I do?
On that person-to-person basis, you're
Yeah.
exactly correct. Like, we're a country of inviting your friends, or not even friends, strangers, over to your home, having them over for dinner, stuff like that. Like, we are a very, when it comes to finding an individual on an individual basis, we are a very nice people. But there is a lot of distrust on like the more plural stage. I mean,
Well,
yeah,
a
it's like
distrust of each other, a distrust of the state, or what?
distrust of the state and a distrust of foreigners.
A distrust of foreigners as
Oh,
well.
absolutely.
Okay, well, give me a little.
lead-
Let's
yeah,
drill
I
down
mean-
on that. So, what do you mean? Give us a little bit more of this distrust of foreigners.
So, as far as I know, we're like the leading country as far as xenophobia, racism, stuff like that
Really,
goes.
you would put
not
yourself above even because that exists here. I think I can fairly say in Czech Republic, even more than the Czechs, if I can put
by
it that way.
by an astounding amount.
Really?
Honestly, yeah. So that plays into a lot when you're sort of a young person who has a lot of friends from abroad, stuff like that. You do definitely notice the treatment that they receive in Slovakia. You do also hear a lot from your older family members, people you know who are of the older generation, especially the ones who grew up during the Soviet regime where there was really no connection to the outside world. There just hasn't been the time, I think, to develop that trust.
So, are you saying that that's mostly because of isolation from the outside world? And
Oh, absolutely. And an unwillingness to sort of break that isolation. The people are very, definitely have gotten themselves set in their ways. Yeah, they like what they've got, even though they don't have a lot. And they definitely... Do you swear on this podcast, or what's the ground rules for that yet?
you can, like YouTube level standards.
All right, so they bitch about the sort of the way that they live and the amount of money they have and the opportunities they have, but still would never trade it for living in another country. At least, like the older generations sort of hold that stance.
So they bitch about things, but generally they are satisfied.
They like to pretend they're satisfied. They need to tell other people that they're satisfied, because there's a lot of satisfaction that even comes out of not being hurt, but being in hardship. There's a lot of satisfaction in Slovak people of just one-upping each other in what horrible conditions they had to endure and what they had to go through and how they live.
So who had it the shittiest?
Exactly.
Or has it the shittiest?
Yeah, always got to one-up each other in that.
Okay. So given that fact, is that what drove you, or why is it that you decided, because we are in Prague, Czech Republic, you could have gone, perhaps to Bratislava. It is the largest city in Slovakia. There are some opportunities there, some industry. So what brought you to Prague?
It's the sort of mash of some Slovak cultural phenomena. So it is still very similar to what life is like in Slovakia and Bratislava especially, with a lot of Western influence as well. So you got a lot more just openness here. The people are definitely more comfortable with their identities, with whoever they are here. They just don't feel as sort of scared to even just reveal themselves to the world over here, which is definitely very nice. It makes for a much better atmosphere than being in Slovakia, even in Bratislava, the capital, and being sort of afraid for themselves. I mean,
but was that your motivation, that you wanted to live in a place that maybe is a bit more open, a bit more diverse, or was it, I mean, I'm sure there's a number of factors, but what was the driving force to leave your country?
Yeah, it felt like a good opportunity to experience that side of the world without going to like the other end of the spectrum completely. Since, as you said, like a lot of the older people, especially even here in Czech Republic, still remember those days. They were a part of Czechoslovakia, so a lot of the culture is very similar and the treatment of other people is very similar. But especially when it comes to young people, you can see the influence of the West. People who I meet up with most of the time share and hold a lot of the same values as I do, which would not necessarily be the case in Slovakia, where even a lot of the young people are on that more conservative, more isolationist way of thinking. So yeah, that is a nice change of pace here, I'd say.
Okay. And would you say most young people, because I saw quite an interesting documentary, I can't remember the name of it. I think I saw it on HBO, about a young Slovak who was starting some sort of nationalistic movement, his own organization. He was the head of it, even though he was probably, 19 at the time. So obviously more conservative, traditional, Eastern-leaning, if I can put it that way. So would you say more young people are perhaps like you in terms of their values and mindset, or this young man who started his own sort of nationalist movement?
So I'm going to be very optimistic here and say that in the western parts of Slovakia, where the capital is located, more people would be more similar-minded to me, say. I could connect to them on a lot more things. But obviously, Slovakia is still a fairly large country-ish. Nothing compared to Canada or anything like that.
But in European terms,
yeah,
we can
still
say.
some diversity there, exactly.
In European terms.
And the further you move out from the West, the more you would experience the more conservative types of people. That's what they have the experience with.
Do you see, and this is sort of, once again, my view as an expat living in Prague, that Prague is kind of torn between East and West in terms of geopolitics.
I think you should really experience Slovakia when you say that.
So I'm asking about Slovakia. Is it also have the same dilemma of whether you should be more aligned to Western values or Eastern values in the politics?
I mean,
is there a divide there, or is it predominantly one or the other?
Definitely a divide. That was also like a very polarizing issue this past election, which happened a couple of months ago, where the leading party that actually did win in the end does have a lot of more Eastern geopolitical leaning. So yeah, it's especially with the older generations, let's say, there you can definitely feel the majority of them do have that Eastern sort of feeling where they would like to possibly return to the good old times, as they say. When it comes to younger people, unfortunately, it is still divided. So even then, you have a lot of people. I'm not gonna be able to cite any statistics or anything along those lines.
That's fine.
But yeah, even with the younger people, there is still a divide on whether the country should be moving more in the fashion of the Western countries, say Germany, the U.S., France, stuff like that, or Eastern countries like, mostly Russia. Honestly, that's like the big representative of that section of the world when it comes to Slovak people, just because they do have a lot of emotional connection to that time.
And do Slovaks, because I think for me, once again, with my experience with Czechs, they're a bit torn. They want to preserve their language, which is clearly Slavic, yet they were greatly influenced by Germany, Austria, and they were part of the Austrian Empire for a long time. However, they really sort of isolate themselves. They don't want to see themselves as Slavs. They don't want to see themselves as Germanic. They just want to be Czechs, whatever that means. Do Slovaks think of themselves as Slavs?
Absolutely. Just only the Slavic part. I mean, your history might be better than mine, but I think that we were also a part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Definitely were. Yeah.
You were, yeah.
That's not a part of our culture or history that we ever associate with. There's, regardless of what age you are or what political leaning you are in Slovakia, you do not associate with Hungarian people. It's just a thing.
Okay.
Tough to describe it, but a lot of sort of animosity from a lot of people. When it comes to the Hungarian people, we definitely see each other as more Slavic. A lot of pride in our Slavic culture, Slavic history. And yeah, that is very visible. It is an argument that is used a lot when people try to propagate this idea of us leaning more to our Eastern neighbors rather than our Western neighbors.
And what about Austria? Because I forget how close really Bratislava is to Vienna. It's a short journey.
Yeah.
Maybe an hour on the train.
Exactly. It's like an hour.
So there's a huge proximity to Vienna. What's your view of Austria and your relationship? As you said, you don't really want to focus too much on your time in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but obviously you were. And there's still a physical proximity.
Yeah.
Like last Christmas, I went with my girlfriend and her daughter to Vienna to see the Christmas markets, and there were Slovaks everywhere. You couldn't turn around without bumping into Slovaks. So I'm like, did they really want to leave the empire? Because they're here for Christmas. So what's the view about Austria in terms of, because the physical proximity is undeniable.
Absolutely. So, the physical proximity, that does a lot, especially for people in Bratislava. So there's this, like, it's almost like a custom of Slovak people to go and shop for groceries and stuff in Austria, just because you know that you'll get better quality at a better price than in Slovakia. So there's a lot of that, of just going back and forth between Austria and Slovakia just for shopping and nothing else. A lot of the more, maybe not rich, but economically better off people, they do move to Austria. Once again, mainly for, I'd say, the economic benefits and the quality of life benefits.
Okay, what about culturally?
That's not much of a thing for us. We don't really go to Austria for their culture, or as far as I know,
Do you young Slovaks learn German still?
as like a third language. It's English and Slovak for us. Other than that, you do, I think generally speaking, you do get to learn an additional language, but at that point it's between Spanish and German at most schools. Not a lot of, pushing on going and learning German just because you're close by to Austria.
Okay.
Not
All
a lot
right.
of that.
And once again, I don't want to get too much into the politics of it, but I know, and actually just this past weekend, we visited Budapest for the weekend. And so once again, the proximity, your country shares a border. At one point on the train, we could see Slovakia on the other side of the river.
Yeah, it's like 3
from the
hours away.
train.
It's nothing.
The train tracks were literally, we never went through Slovakia, but came so close to the border, we could see your country on the other side. And once again, Hungarian, not Germanic, not Slavic, something completely different. So different language,
Yep.
historically a different culture. And yet I know there are a good number of ethnic Hungarians within Slovakia. Is that still an issue today?
Not an issue per se. So a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of the southern border of Slovakia is filled with Slovako-Hungarian mix of people, just families interlocking themselves culturally.
Which was common, just to draw a parallel. If we look at historical Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland, it was the same thing, but it was Germans and Czechs.
Yep.
So you had many mixed relationships, or, if you were German, you probably had a Czech grandparent. If you were Czech, you probably had at least one German So a lot of simply mixing in terms of marriage, relationships, cultures.
Funny
just
that you
'cause once
mentioned
again,
Sudetenland because, fun fact. So a part of Slovakia that is on the southern end of it, nearby Bratislava once again, is called Žitný Ostrov. This is a part that at some point was a part of the Hungaro-Austrian Empire. Hungarians like to, make their claim to it a lot. It is filled with naturally occurring water. Not naturally, drinkable water.
like natural springs.
Yeah, natural springs, a lot of underground reservoirs, stuff
Sure.
like that. Very valuable to a country. Hungarians definitely like to make their claim to it. A couple of years ago, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, actually only, the prime minister of Hungary
Yes.
was wearing a scarf with the name Hungary and then like a small symbol of the land of Hungary, and it did include Žitný Ostrov, which is definitely officially a part of Slovakia. It did cause quite an uproar, definitely fanned the flames of the culturally not liking Hungarians. So yeah, that's just like a fun little thing to mention when talking
so
about
there is-
Sudetenland. Yeah,
There is
kind of a parallel.
some
yeah.
tension, but I think this is a story that in Europe over and over and over and
course.
over again gets retold. There's a redrawing of the
We're
borders.
too close to the Balkans to not have that issue.
Yes, the Balkans, it's even more complicated, but a redrawing of the borders, and however you draw those borders, there's going to be some minority, ethnically or linguistically, some minority
course.
there. And so to create at least a degree of political tension, whether it's Hungarians in Slovakia, historically in the past, German speakers in Czechoslovakia, other portions like Kosovo, Serbs and Albanians. This is kind of a quite typical European problem, if I can put it that way, as a foreigner. This is a very sort of, it's like splitting the atom. It's like somehow you split and then there's more challenges that arise and you can sort of never get those borders perfect.
The geographical borders don't work all the time.
It's almost impossible.
But yeah, that part of the country is definitely filled a lot with Hungarians. At least people who speak Hungarian definitely associate themselves with the culture of Hungary. So there is a lot of that influence. It's where I grew up, so I also had a lot of that influence on me. Basically all of my family knows Hungarian. We have a lot of family there. What used to also happen was large population movements from the area of Slovakia where entire cities or villages would just upend themselves and move over to Hungary or from Hungary to Slovakia. So there is a lot of cultural mixage there, definitely.
Okay. So you have Slovaks, you have Hungarians, and just to sort of round out people's view of your country, given probably most people don't know a lot about Slovakia, I think it's fair to say the next probably significant minority would be Gypsies or Romani,
people.
the Roma people, to use the politically correct term. So is there any issue between the Roma people and the rest of the Slovak culture?
Slovak people kind of like to pretend that they don't exist in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of villages that are just filled with Roma people on the outskirts of larger towns. Definitely not in economically viable zones where there isn't a lot of work, where there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of schools, not that much opportunity to even move out of that sort of peg of the economical ladder that we've built in Slovakia. If you were to compare the hatred of Slovaks towards other cultures, towards other countries, towards other people, Roma would rank one by miles and leagues. Speaking from experience, the older you get, or not the older you get, but the older the person is, the higher the likelihood you'll hear something racist towards the Roma people from them. Obviously, I think that's probably pretty consistent with all people and races. But yeah,
I don't think, just to save your country's image again, that only happens in Slovakia.
No, of
I
course
know
not.
personally.
As far as Europe goes, that's very
It's
normal.
fairly common.
Yeah.
And certainly here in Czech Republic, their feeling towards their Roma population, I think, is quite similar.
Yeah, not sure how much you get that from politicians in the Czech Republic, but you also do get from Slovak politicians. It is an easy dig for them. Not a lot of the Roma population votes, so they're not really afraid of losing a voter base. A lot of people have friends of friends, or you hear those stories of a friend of my friend, my aunt or something like that had a bad experience with a Roma person, something along those lines. So it is very present in our culture, that sort of disdain for the culture. Definitely, at least in my opinion, not justified, considering the treatment that they've received both from our government and our people as a whole, but it is a fact of life there, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, and it's kind of a pan-European issue, I think it's fair to say. It's not only an issue in your country.
Yeah, as a nomadic people,
Yeah.
Roma people sort of appear everywhere across Europe. A lot of places have driven them out in unsavory ways, but...
And historically, I think it's fair to say there were larger numbers in the eastern part of Europe, but since the European Union, I think there's been more of them. In fact, I know, because I've seen the news stories, say Slovak gypsies going to the UK in places like Sheffield. I've seen the news stories. So Roma people from Slovakia showing up in large numbers end up in council estates in places in England, and so there being some social issues around that as well. So I know that because I've seen some of the news stories. So it's becoming more of an issue in Western countries because there has been in recent years also migration from Eastern Europe to Western with the opening up of borders because of the EU. All right. So once again, I don't want to get too much into the political stuff. Bring it down to, once again, a more personal level. So you're from Slovakia. You've decided to move to Prague. What has your experience been so far as technically a foreigner living in Czech Republic?
Yeah, very pleasant, honestly. Just thinking on my experiences, things I've seen here, people are definitely more kind to me as a Slovak. There is a lot of, let's say, banter between Slovak and Czech people, but there's a like a much larger amount of brotherly love. Like we call them brothers Czechs, they call us brothers Slovaks.
Okay.
Like, I mean, one of my favorite examples to mention here is like if there's a sport event going on, if it's Slovakia versus Czechia, we're going to scream and shout and make the most vile insults at the other country. But the moment that country is on like a national stage is playing against another country, we're just going to defend them to the end of our lives, I'd say. So
30 years on from approximately 30 years since the Velvet divorce,
yeah,
things are still fairly close between
definitely
Czechs and Slovaks.
very close. So I just haven't had many bad experiences of someone calling me a foreigner or anything along those lines. I mean,
Have you had any negative experiences in terms of engaging with Czechs?
Not really, I don't think so. I mean, like once I start speaking Slovak, the Czech people tend to go, "Oh, you're Slovak. Oh, that's so nice. That's so cute. Like you made it here or whatever." Like they do take some pride in the fact that I'm like a Slovak expat that chose them over Slovakia or chose to
Okay.
live in Prague over Bratislava.
Okay.
So there is some pride in like, there is some pride in that for them. I haven't had any like bad experiences, thankfully.
Okay.
Not yet, at least.
And if I could, I'd like to ask about the languages because they're not exactly the same, but they're quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
And a comparison I use, because I've studied them both Portuguese and Spanish, I would say it's maybe something like this. They're very close. There certainly are differences, but generally speaking, it's mutually intelligible. You can communicate. Although I've had some Czech people tell me, young Czech people now maybe have a hard time with Slovak. What's your experience in terms of the language and communicating?
So yeah, as you mentioned, some of the younger, like when we say younger, we're talking really young now, because so I'm 20, so even people who are 20 coming from Slovakia grew up watching Czech dubs of movies and TV shows, watching movies with Czech subtitles. It was incredibly common. So a lot of the people from, say, 20 up do definitely have no issues whatsoever when it comes to understanding Czech people and vice versa. Of course, there's a couple of edge cases where the translation is just so different from the word that we use in Slovakia, where we just have no clue what it means. But you would never find yourself in a situation where you're having a talk with someone and you couldn't understand them if you're from Slovakia and you're speaking to someone from the Czech Republic.
So it's
That just doesn't
unlikely
happen.
for you to be like completely lost.
Yeah, unless they're trying to like trick you or get you by using by specifically using words that are incredibly different. It just doesn't happen ever. So in that sense, it's really nice. It makes the whole experience of living abroad much more comfortable. As you mentioned, the younger people now just have access to subtitles, dubbing, stuff like that, all in their native language. So I've heard some of that is slowly going away, that mutual understanding in all cases. I haven't experienced any young Czech or Slovak person not understanding the other countryman's speech. But yeah, I've heard stories just like you.
I have to ask you about something. We discussed because we work together in the same office, and one day you said you've never spoken Czech here. And so my question is, do you ever feel like you should make an effort to speak Czech? Has any Czech person say you're in Czech Republic, you should speak Czech? Has that ever been an issue?
So I definitely exaggerated when I said I've never spoken Czech in the Czech Republic. I do it for two reasons, I'd say. Either to make fun of Czech people when going out and I'm drinking a beer with some of my Czech friends, I definitely will pull out the Czech accent with horrible Czech pronunciation of words. And then sometimes when like leaving a supermarket or something like that, I'll just use the Czech form of buy instead of the Slovak form of it.
Yeah.
Just because these words are sort of different. So sometimes the cashier would give me a weird look when I said goodbye in
You
Slovak.
say
And so-
"Dovidenia"?
Yeah, I say dovidenia. and I'm like, who you talking to?
Yeah, this is where it's completely different. Czech naskladano and
Yeah.
Slovak is dovidenia. Although that did happen to me once. We went to a Waffle House here in Prague on Letna, and it just so happened our waitress was Slovak.
Mm-hmm.
And we were leaving, and we were going to give the obligatory naskladano, and the waitress said dovidenia.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned to my Czech girlfriend. I'm like, "Dovidenia," and she's like, "Yeah, that's Slovak."
That's a Slovak there, yeah. That is really fun though to like meet even people who work as baristas or cashiers who are Slovak and will still speak Slovak even though they're working in the Czech Republic. I'd say that even just that proves that there's really not much of like cultural disdain from the Czech people surrounding that. I don't think they really mind it too much. Like even if you did try to speak in Czech, I think they'd you sort of give it away with your accent. It is a bit different, so they would know that you're a Slovak person trying to sort of piece together a Czech sentence.
Well, what I can say from, I have still, even after so many years, have a minimal level of Czech. But when I hear Slovak, I have to say it's softer.
Definitely.
It's softer. It has more of these soft consonants, I think. And so it is a little bit softer compared to Czech is a little bit harsher,
Yeah,
if
it's
I can
more
say
rough.
that
Yeah,
way.
definitely.
It's a bit rougher.
We have the
Slovak
and
sounds a bit
yeah.
softer, a bit nicer, if I can say that without offending my
One of
Czech
our
friends.
many prides when it comes to, looking at Czech people and priding ourselves on our differences. That's definitely one of the things we appreciate a lot about our country. So during the separation of Czechoslovakia, Czech people, they, let's say, took with very large quotation marks. They took the flag, they took the national anthem, I believe. A lot of the symbols of the country were kept with Czechs. I mean, in my mind, that is sort of that is completely fine with me because they do have a long-standing culture of their country, of their kingdom, there is much more history to the Czech Republic than Slovakia, unfortunately, but we did keep the language of Slovakia, which is beautiful, much better than the Czech language, which is why I still try to limit my Czech to as little as humanly possible. But yeah, one of our prides, yeah.
Okay, but overall, your experience has been positive. It's not like
Yeah.
Czech people saying, "What are you doing here?" Because, of course, many Slovak people do live here. They're actually not, I don't think they're number one in terms of foreigners.
No, I don't
that
think
live here.
so.
I think it's actually as Ukrainians. But
Might be, yeah.
but I think Slovaks are number two. But whatever the actual number is, of course, many Slovaks still live here. And I think these mixed marriages between Czech Slovak, I think, are still fairly common, are they not?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to marrying a person from another country, as far as statistics go, both for the actual numbers of people married in cross-national marriages and also in the acceptance of the family, of the fact that their, for example, child married someone from the Czech Republic, that would definitely be the top-ranking country to marry into.
Okay.
That was a very confusing way to say that, but
basically, it's okay. It's if you brought home
a Czech person, no one would bat an eye.
no one would say, "Oh, you're dating a Czech." People
you'd
wouldn't
get a
think it's-
small joke or something from your uncle about it, but that would be it.
Okay. So obviously, as I said, many Slovaks live here. Are there many Czechs that actually move and live in Slovakia?
A much lower number, yeah.
Because they did some sort of survey a few years back, and they said to Czech people, if you couldn't live in Czech Republic anymore, where would be the number one place you would move? And the majority said Slovakia, for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
Similar language, culture, it's close, it's a neighboring country. So it's not so unusual that the majority of them said, well, if I had to leave Czech Republic, I would move to Slovakia. However, you said there's not many actually Czech people. Did you encounter any Czech people living in Slovakia?
Definitely did encounter. They also don't try to make too much of an effort to speak Slovak in Slovakia,
Sure. Yeah.
which is completely fine by us, I
Yeah.
think. A lot less. They're a lot less present than here, I'd say. So than Slovaks here, much less noticeable. Especially speaking, so there are parts of the country when you go in Slovakia, when you go more north, there's a lot more Czech people, not really concentrated in the super large cities like Bratislava, but more in the culturally similar regions. Because there's even regions of Slovakia where they do speak Slovak, but in a way that is much more similar.
Sure.
In dialect that is much more similar than to the Czech language.
So some sort of regional dialect in a region that's perhaps close to the
Exactly.
Czech border, for example.
You definitely get a lot more of them there than the capital, I think.
Yes, or perhaps that region where Poland, Czech Republic, and Slovakia meet.
Yeah, that would be the Záhoria.
Okay.
So,
And
north of the
so there
capital.
they kind of have their own dialect, or at least that's what I understand.
Yeah, it's as you said before, it's a more harsh, rough form of the Slovak language. A lot of the, let's say, linguistic attributes of Czech words are taken over there and incorporated into the Slovak language. So yeah, a bit more similar, still completely understandable to both Slovaks and Czechs, but yeah, you can feel the difference there.
Okay. And once again, bringing it more to your own personal kind of goals, do you think you've said overall your experience as a Slovak living in Prague has been positive. You still have this brotherly connection with Czechs. For the future, do you think you'll stay here or eventually return to Slovakia?
Still want to eventually return. I'd say I've mostly overcome the homesick feeling of leaving your country for the first time for a long period of time. But I still feel, whenever I return to Slovakia, which is only like 5 hours away, so quite often, I still do feel more comfortable and at home there. It might just be that my experience in the Czech Republic is mostly from Prague, which is a very busy, very lively city, which Bratislava and other cities in Slovakia are much less so. So it might just be that I do enjoy that more calm lifestyle and want to return to it eventually. I do enjoy it at the moment, the sort of social style of Prague over Bratislava, but yeah, one day.
Okay. And you're still quite young, and given that because of the European Union there's a freedom of movement, would you ever consider perhaps being an expat in another country, somewhere further afield, somewhere in Western Europe or Southern Europe perhaps?
Yeah, definitely been thinking about other countries. Might not even be in Europe. I might just want to try to experience. Well,
And which
saying
countries?
the culture of a different continent is a bit broad, but I really like Portuguese. I like the sound of it. So either Portugal, possibly Brazil, if I'm feeling extremely risky.
It's funny that you should say that. Did you know that I lived in Brazil many years ago?
I did
think
not
I told
know.
Didn't I tell you that?
I don't think you told me that. I know you speak Spanish/Portuguese.
My
but
Portuguese is better than my Spanish because years ago, when I was basically your age, years ago when I was younger, I
Yes.
did missionary work for my church, and I lived in Brazil for a year and a half, and that's where I learned Portuguese.
Oh.
So my Portuguese is at a conversational level, and then when I returned to Canada, I did like a year of university Spanish. That's why I used the example that, Czech Slovak is like Spanish Portuguese. They're very close linguistically.
Right, and what was the change there from Canada moving to Brazil? I mean,
It's a
could've-
huge
yeah.
difference. We're talking order of magnitudes because for you moving from Slovak to Czech Republic is like maybe a Canadian going to America. They share a border. It's the same language, we can say.
Probably more likely to going to Alaska specifically.
But a slight change. Going to Brazil was a big change. Order of magnitude from the snowy north to tropical south, from English to Portuguese, from first world to third world, even though we're not really supposed to use these terms anymore, from a developed country to a developing country. So there was a huge culture shock, definitely a huge culture shock. Although I did enjoy my time there, and I enjoyed learning the Portuguese language. I have to say, my Portuguese is still much better than my Czech, and I've lived here much longer than I ever lived in Brazil. So what draws you to Brazil besides learning Portuguese? What else do you happen or hope to find there?
The country, the music, the culture, all of that sort of combined. I mean, I love bossa nova as far as like the music part of that goes.
That's interesting. It's definitely not we're talking like back in the 60s is bossa nova. So how did you discover this music? It's certainly not anything near, I think it's fair to say, that you're Gen Z. Is that okay to use that term? Yeah. So how does someone from Gen Z discover bossa nova?
So I'm an enjoyer of jazz, enjoyer of the Portuguese language. I've had conversations about what language is the most beautiful, fought with a lot of people who think French is the most beautiful language. It definitely is not. It is obviously Portuguese. So just combining my love for jazz and the Portuguese language, which I have not learned a word of yet, which is very unfortunate.
Well, I can teach you some basics. I know enough. I can show you tell you some basic Portuguese
I'll
words
have to get
and
some
expresses.
lessons.
I'll give you a few free lessons, although from Brazilian, because once again, Brazilian Portuguese is not the same as what you'd learn in Portugal. It's kind of like American English versus British English.
But Duolingo isn't doing the trick for me.
But I also agree it's very beautiful language. And that was, on a personal note, what was hard for me, because when I was in Brazil, it was easy to learn Portuguese because I loved the language. I liked the way it sounded. I enjoyed speaking it, the way I felt, trying to say the words. Once again, if I'm being honest, and I don't want to annoy all my Czech friends, I had like the opposite experience learning Czech. And I did try, as many expats here in Prague do when they first arrive. I took lessons at a school for foreigners, and I just, we were kind of like, me and the Czech language was oil and water. It just...
To be fair to you, it is a very difficult language. The Slavic languages are very difficult, so... Makes sense, so I just really like that culture, I think. Also, the country is just so different from anything I could experience here in the eastern-ish parts of... You can't say Eastern Europe to a Slovak person, though, so I'm going to have to change that. Central Europe,
Okay, well, that's the same with Czechs. Czechs don't like to be considered Eastern Europe.
The most you can say to a Czech person is Central Europe. They would really like to be called
Czech,
Western,
Central, but you guys are technically east of Czech Republic. Aren't we getting into the Eastern sphere? Is it not fair to say you're Eastern Europe? And if not, where does Eastern Europe begin?
Due to complete delusion on our side, it is not acceptable to call us Eastern Europeans.
But why?
I'm not sure, honestly. It just...
Is there a negative connotation?
There definitely is.
Is this the Euro trip thing?
Yeah, the more east you go, the more corruption there is, the worse the economic state of the country is. You want to be associated with the more rich, larger countries of the European region. So
it's not a geographical thing. It's the stigma that comes with being Eastern European.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be associated with Bulgaria, Romania. You kind of are okay with being associated with the Ukraine at this point, but even that was a no-go some years ago. So, you'd want to be moving to the west as much as you want, as much as you can. Although lately that has also changed in the civil discourse, where a lot more people want to be associated with the East, or at least publicly make that apparent that you want to be more associated with the East than the West. But still, it is a massive pet peeve for Slovak people when you call them Eastern Europeans instead of Central Europeans.
So, and that you share that with the Czechs, because the Czechs are the same. Don't call them Eastern European, call them Central Europeans.
Exactly.
So I guess the question is, where does the East begin?
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, on the eastern border of Slovakia, that's where it can begin. That's a pretty good border. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things. There's the political component, there's the geographical component, and of course, there's the cultural component. And I suppose, and this is what I tell my Czech friends, we think we put these groups, Czechs, Slovaks, Poles, into Eastern Europe more because of the past and the political, because these were the countries that were behind the Iron
bloc.
Curtain.
Yeah.
They were controlled by the Soviets and part of the Soviet bloc. So for this reason, think of people from these countries as being Eastern Europeans, regardless of geography and other considerations. Are you, speaking of Central Europe, we'll put it that way, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of Central Europe?
Optimistic, I'd like to say. Especially when it comes to integration and globalization, stuff like that, there has been more vocal pushback for that, even in Poland, in Slovakia, and even in the Czech Republic, honestly. That sort of push has been, or rather that counter push has been happening, where a lot more people want to slow down on the integration and on the not necessarily overreach, but the overlap of the European Union, of NATO, stuff like that.
But you guys are in the EU, and you have adopted even the euro, which is unusual because most of your neighbors, Czechs still have their crowns, the Polish still have their zlotys, the Hungarians still have their florins. So in that regard, I suppose you're better members of the EU, because at the very least your country did adopt the euro.
Yeah, that was one of the smartest decisions. It was still mired in drama and in economic, scandals, when we were adopting the euro and switching over from the Slovak koruna to the euro. But it was absolutely a necessity for us, just because we did not have the financial skills to hold our own economy together after the dissolution of Czechoslovakia. Czechs just had a much longer history of fiscal responsibility and keeping themselves sort of together as a country. So that was definitely one of our better moves to switch over to the euro, as the Czech Republic, I mean, that from the examples you gave of Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, this is the only one I know of as far as more details into their economics go. So I know that the Czech Republic has a strong currency, has a strong economy, even compared to the European Union, is still stronger in a lot of aspects and outperforms it a lot of years.
But for your country, you think it was the right choice?
Yeah, we do not have responsible politicians in Slovakia. There's a lot of corruption there. There's a lot of scandals there constantly, especially when it comes to money. So, definitely the better move to have some both support and oversight from the European Union, I think.
So overall, you're optimistic about the European experiment, as they call it, your country being a member
as well,
of the EU.
Even the pro-Eastern-ish political parties that did manage to win out this past election in Slovakia still had to publicly make announcements of no intentions of leaving the EU or no intentions of leaving NATO, just because that would be a massive no-go, even for the more Eastern-thinking Europeans, not Europeans, Slovaks. Even they know that we do need the European Union. We do need to stay there, both for protection and for just the support we receive.
Okay, so there's no, even from the Eastern-leaning type politicians, no one's saying we need to get out of the EU.
Yeah, they made loud statements about the evils of the European Union and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, they still had to proclaim that they would make no attempts of leaving these organizations, just because it would be political suicide in a way. There would be a lot of pushback, both from the media and the people. So
okay, so Slovaks still think of it mostly as a net positive.
Yeah, mostly.
To be in the EU, to be in the Euro club.
That majority is shrinking, but yes, at this point, still mostly, yeah.
Okay, and for you personally, you would prefer to them keep going with this experiment and stay in.
Yeah, I like the idea of an integrated and connected Europe with open travel, open borders, sort of lesser taxes on imports, exports. Just seems like a fairly large net positive for the country.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. So
right.
once again, thank you, Sam, for being the guest today. And once again, the podcast is Follow Your Feet. So if you're not sure whether you should live abroad, let your feet decide and follow your feet where they take you. All right. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.